Good evening and welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host, and we're diving deep into a story that's affecting tens of thousands of families across the nation. The Ministry of Education has just approved a staggering 150,000 transfer requests for grade 9 students moving into senior school. But this massive administrative undertaking comes with strict new deadlines and is unfolding against a backdrop of significant challenges in our secondary schools. Tonight, we examine what this means for our education system, our children, and the future of Kenya's workforce. Let's start with the numbers because they are truly monumental. The ministry has processed and approved 150,000 individual transfer applications. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the entire population of a county like Kirinyaga or Bomet. Each one of those approvals represents a student, a family, a set of hopes and plans being reshuffled. The ministry set an initial one-week deadline to achieve a 100% transition from primary to secondary school, a target they openly admitted they failed to meet. This failure prompted an extension, pushing the final reporting deadline to January 21st. Yet, as we enter the second week of what should be the new term, learning in many senior secondary schools has yet to meaningfully begin. The gap between policy on paper and reality in the classroom has never felt wider. So, what's causing this paralysis? Our investigation points to a perfect storm of logistical failures. First, and most critically, there is a severe and ongoing shortage of textbooks. Students are showing up to new schools, often in new pathways, with nothing to read. Imagine starting Form 1, a crucial foundational year, without the basic tools for learning. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's an academic crisis in slow motion. Second, we're seeing what officials are calling mass switching of learning pathways. The competency-based curriculum, or CBC, requires students to choose specialized tracks in senior school, arts, sports, STEM, and so on. It appears a significant number of students, or perhaps their parents, are having second thoughts after initial placements, leading to a flood of transfer requests not just between schools, but between entire educational trajectories. This administrative chaos is compounded by a third issue: low reporting rates in some institutions. Some schools are simply sitting empty, while others are overwhelmed. Let's bring in our first perspective. Dr. Amina Wanjiru, an educational policy analyst based in Nairobi. Dr. Amina, 150,000 transfers is an unprecedented administrative load. What does this tell us about the state of the CBC transition? Dr. Amina, thank you. This number is a symptom, not the disease. It tells us several things. First, that the initial placement process was perhaps too rigid or did not adequately capture student and parent preferences. When you have 150,000 people formally seeking a change, it indicates a systemic mismatch. Second, it exposes the immense pressure the ministry is under to make the CBC work. The 100% transition goal is noble, but chasing a statistical target can sometimes overshadow the quality of that transition. Pushing students into schools without books, or into pathways they don't understand, risks undermining the entire promise of the CBC, which is about nurturing individual talents. This scramble of transfers is the system trying to correct itself in real time, but the cost is lost learning time and immense stress for all involved. Host, a critical point about quality versus quantity. Now, let's consider the view from the ground. We're joined by Mr. Benjamin Sakwa, whose reporting for The Standard has been tracking these issues. Benjamin, you've been speaking to teachers, parents, and students. What are you hearing? Benjamin, SAKWA, chaos and anxiety, frankly. In one school I visited in Western Kenya, 40% of the expected grade 10 students had not reported by the second week. The head teacher was at his wit's end, no textbooks from the government, no clarity on how many students he would finally have, and some of those who had reported were asking to switch from the STEM pathway they were placed into the arts pathway. Parents are confused. They hear about these pathways but don't fully grasp what they mean for their child's future. Is STEM the only route to a good job? What if my child is good at both arts and sciences? The communication has been poor. And the teachers? They are demoralized. They are expected to implement a new curriculum without the foundational materials, managing half-empty classes while awaiting an influx of transfer students. The human cost of these 150,000 file movements is immense. Host, 40% non-reporting in some schools. That's a startling figure. It suggests the challenge isn't just moving students around, but actually getting them into any classroom. This brings us to the strict deadlines the ministry has now imposed. The message is clear: the grace period is over. All students must be in their final assigned senior schools, and schools must begin teaching immediately. But is this a realistic demand, Or is it setting up schools and students for further failure? To explore that, let's look at this from an economic and international perspective. The pressure to educate Kenya's youth is not just a local issue. It's tied to global development goals and, historically, to how the world views and assists countries like Kenya. This week, the international development charity ActionAid UK announced a major shift. Its new co-chief executives stated they will move away from their long-standing Sponsor a Child scheme, launched in 1972. They called such schemes paternalistic and said they carry racialized undertones. Instead, they plan to focus on long-term, grassroots funding, a move they frame as decolonizing their work. This is a seismic shift in the development world. For decades, the image of a Western donor supporting a specific African child has been a powerful fundraising tool, but critics have long argued it creates a distorted, savior-based dynamic and fails to address systemic issues. So, what's the connection to our 150,000 grade 9 students? It's about agency and systemic thinking. The old model, pick a child, send money, get a photo, is akin to focusing on moving one student from point A to point B without fixing the road. ActionAid is now saying, let's fund the road builders, the local communities, the grassroots organizations. In our context, is the ministry's massive transfer operation like the old sponsor model? Focusing intensely on the individual placement metric, getting every single body into a school, while the systemic road, the infrastructure of textbooks, teacher training, and clear pathway counseling remains full of potholes. The debate ActionAid has ignited forces us to ask, are we treating the symptom of placement or curing the disease of a poorly resourced transition? Let's bring in a contrary view. Mr. Silas Mwangi, a former Ministry of Education official and now an education consultant. Mr. Mwangi, some would say the ministry has no choice. You have a cohort of students that must be placed. The deadlines are harsh but necessary to end the uncertainty. Is the criticism fair? SILAS-MWANGI, absolutely not fair. You must understand the scale. We are implementing the most radical curriculum change in this nation's history. The CBC is a complete paradigm shift. With any change of this magnitude, there will be friction. The 150,000 transfer requests show the system is responsive. It shows we are listening to parents and students and allowing for choice within the new framework. Were there delays in textbook procurement? Possibly. But the priority had to be placement first. A student at home has a 0% chance of learning. A student in a school, even with temporary material shortages, has a 100% chance of being in a learning environment, of interacting with teachers and peers. The deadlines are not punitive, they are a circuit breaker to end the indecision. The focus now must be on supporting the schools that have received these transfer students. The systemic issues will be solved, but you cannot solve them while the primary objective, getting children into senior school, is still in flux. Host, a compelling defense, placement as the non-negotiable first step. But this tension between immediate action and long-term system health is a global governance challenge. We see it in other sectors in other countries. Even in seemingly unrelated news, the theme emerges. Take the story of Nigerian chef Hilda Basai, who just set her third Guinness World Record, this time for the largest serving of rice. It's a fantastic achievement, a celebration of culinary skill and scale. But think about the logistics. To attempt such a record, you need precise planning, massive resources, a clear objective, and flawless execution. The parallel to our education story is striking. The ministry has a massive objective, transition an entire generation. It attempted a precise one-week plan. The execution, by their own admission, faltered. Now, like a chef adjusting a recipe, they've extended the time and approved a huge number of ingredient swaps, the student transfers. The question is, will the final dish, the educated Kenyan child, be of the quality we hoped for? Or consider the warning just issued by senior Christian leaders in Jerusalem. They spoke against outside interference from political actors and ideologies like Christian Zionism, saying they threaten the unity and future of Christianity in the Holy Land. It's a plea for local agency, for the community on the ground to steward its own future without external agendas distorting it. In our Kenyan context, who are the outside actors? Could it be the relentless pressure of global education benchmarks, or the well-intentioned but sometimes misaligned priorities of international development partners? Are we designing an education system for Kenyan children in a Kenyan future, or are we trying to fit them into a globally prescribed model? The parents switching their children's pathways might be, in their own way, asserting that local agency, saying, I know my child better than the placement algorithm does. Let's visualize the scale of this challenge. We've talked about 150,000 transfers, but what about the total cohort? How many students are we actually talking about in this transition? Now, let's break down what these pathways entail. The CBC Senior School is built on four main pillars. Finally, the crux of the matter, resources. The ministry's budget allocation for secondary education this year is substantial, but how does it break down? These visuals tell a clear story: a massive student body, a complex new system, and a resource allocation where infrastructure and teacher training are competing fiercely with the immediate cost of implementing the new curriculum itself. The textbook shortage isn't an accident. It's a potential consequence of these tough budgetary choices. We need to look forward. The deadlines are set. The transfers are approved. What happens next? We spoke to a grade 10 student, Wanjiku, who just transferred from a national school in Nakuru to a county school closer to home in Kiambu to pursue the performing arts pathway. WNJIKU, I was placed in STEM because I did well in maths and science, but my heart is in music and drama. My parents didn't understand at first. They said STEM is for success. It took many meetings, and finally this transfer, for them to agree. I am happy to be in the right place now, but my new school says our textbooks and the new curriculum materials for arts haven't arrived. We are sitting in class, and the teacher is trying to use old notes. It feels like we are already behind, and we haven't even started. Host Wanjiku's story encapsulates it all: the struggle for the right fit, the parental pressure, the eventual success of the transfer system, and then the brick wall of missing resources. Her future, and the future of 149,999 others, now depends on what happens in the next few weeks. Can the ministry and school heads turn this chaotic transition into a stable foundation for learning? The path is fraught. But there are also stories of incredible resilience. Teachers pooling resources to create handouts. Community associations donating old books as stopgaps. The very fact that 150,000 requests were processed shows a bureaucratic machine working, however strained. The debate between Dr. Amina's systemic critique and Mr. Mwanga's pragmatic defense is the debate Kenya needs to have. It's not about assigning blame for this rocky start. It's about honestly assessing whether we are building a system that decolonizes education, that gives Kenyan students agency over their talents, like ActionAid's new model, or whether we are simply moving them through a new, complex maze with the same old resource constraints. As President William Ruto's administration continues to stake its legacy on education reform, and as the world watches how a major African economy manages this generational shift, the coming term will be critical. The 150,000 transfer students are not just a statistic, they are the test case. Their success or failure will determine the fate of the CBC and shape Kenya's human capital for decades. The strict deadlines have forced a decision. Now, the harder work of making that decision meaningful begins. For Kenya News Update today, this has been a deep dive into the numbers and narratives shaping our nation's future. We'll continue to follow this story closely. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for more in-depth reporting. Good night.